Recording in progress.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and it's another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. I have a returning guest who's co-hosted with me many times. This time, he's actually kind of being the host. We're going
Which
to
I've
talk.
done before.
Well, we're going to talk Mad Magazine and other stuff. I'll do a quick plug. Here's the cover of my book, Unconditionally MAD Part One. I don't have the book itself, but it is out, so you can get it on Amazon and everything else like that. Anyway, so without further ado, here is Kamden Spies, and take it away, and we will start talking mad.
I think this is like the sixth time I've hosted your show, by the way.
Probably. Well, I know you interviewed me at least once or twice, so here we go again.
Twice.
So yeah, there we
So,
go.
first I gotta ask you because people are gonna want to know why write a book on Mad? There's already 17 different books on Mad.
Well, if you read the introduction on this book, um, I did a two-part cracked history, which needed to be done in about
Yes.
2011, and because nobody else did it before or since, so there you go. Yeah, I had the same reservations about it, and my publisher Ben Omar at Bear Manor Media kept begging me. It's like, "Well, you've done Crack, now do Mad," and I always turned him down because I knew it'd be a big project. Crack covers 45 years,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're doing a good Mad history, you're not going to just cover like the good years of the 50s, 60s, 70s. You're going to cover everything. At least that's the way I think about it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so but I knew there was other Mad history books. So I said, well, and then I started reading through the other Mad history books, and I realized all the other Mad history books came out in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, and nothing's come out really since. So what do you do about that? Now, again, people would say, well, those are the crummy years anyway. Well, there's something to be said positively about John Ficarra and Bill Morrison's 10 years on the thing. And, you know, it seemed like something I could tackle. And I think I started it right after the pandemic started. So that was a good excuse to do it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and there we are.
And now there's also not besides the hundreds of books on Mad, there's also hundreds of books on either Jack Davis or Harvey Kurtzman
Oh, yeah.
and Will Elder or Wally Wood. There's like a 4-volume fanographic series on Wally Wood right now.
Right.
And now, do you also write about the history of EC a little bit too?
I do, but I do refer to other books. So that big ass history of EC comics that Grant Geisman did.
The Taschen book? Are you talking
Yeah,
about the Taschen?
yeah. Basically, I do a very, very, very edited version of what he wrote. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because his takes a book, mine is like maybe a few pages. Because I
That book is so
realize,
big.
yeah.
That book is so big you can't check it out of a library. That's a true
I
fact. You
I
cannot.
believe it. Yeah, I believe it because most libraries they consider that reference library stuff, and you have to read it there, so they don't want it stolen or whatever, damaged or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, I get it.
Do you have that book?
I do. I bought it when it came out. It was one of the few
You
impulse
have
purchases I got. Yeah.
did it come like the Mickey Mouse or in the Disneyland ones where it's like a giant the in the Disneyland ones where it's a giant where you have to like literally carry it by a handle kind of book, or is it like the Little Nemo on Slumberland book where it's thick but it's like not like
It it
cumbersome thick?
it could have used a handle, but it's just in a box
Yeah,
that
that's like the Disneyland one.
but it
The
doesn't have a
Disneyland one at
it doesn't
Twilight,
have
you
a
don't have
handle on it, so you just have to lift it
you don't have
bodily.
the Disneyland by the way, buy it. It's like
Okay.
$15 now.
Okay. You'll have to tell me after the show which one it is because
Yeah,
I
it's
have a
buy
good
it
Disneyland
buy it
book.
at Hamilton Books. It's like $20. That's it.
Okay. Show me that link later. But anyway, I might have it, I might not. But if it's the size of the EC book, then I don't. So
No, it's a
um
little bit smaller. It's about the size of their comic strip books that they did. Like
oh okay. Then
the
I
McKay
have
book.
that one. I have that one. No, this book is actually larger. It's
Yeah, so it's
about
like the Mickey Mouse. It's the size of the Mickey Mouse one, which is like about this
yeah,
big.
it's actually bigger. I'm trying to think if it's bigger than the old EC book that's the Nostalgia Press one. I think it is. It's certainly thicker. It's about
Hmm.
2 to 3 inches thick. So it's worth buying. It costs a couple $100. You might be able to find it for 150, which is when I bought it.
Yeah.
Um, and So far, it hasn't gone out of print, but it's a limited number run, so who knows? So if you like EC, you like Mad, it's worth a purchase. So,
Mm.
and because Grant was so thorough and he put actually new information in that book, I decided not to just crib all his information. I basically, you know, I did a few quotes from the thing and stuff like that. But at the end, I basically said, if you want to read more, read Grant Geisman's book. You know, and because my book's about Mad, it's not about the EC in total. So if you want the whole EC story, get that other book. Anyway, there we go.
Now, we can't talk about EC without talking about Mad though. Is and one of my questions for you at the fan, because to people listening, I should tell you why I'm doing this, by the way. So I'm writing a data set digital library project about Mad, its fan base and its art. So since Mark's book literally came out the day that I decided to do the project, I'm interviewing Mark as my secondary research put on the put to let's say to fill in space in a long paper.
Okay.
You got to have enough sources to fill in that word count. But now, one of the things I've to ask is for the fan base of Mad. There's a lot. There's often a theory that's considered wrong that EC eventually became Mad when EC and Mad had already existed when EC was still in print.
How are you phrasing that? I mean, EC still exists to this day. It
Right.
is, it
But
is,
Mad but
yeah,
people have I've read quotes that basically have said that EC became Mad because EC stopped publishing horror, which they were still publishing horror when Mad number
yeah,
one was
yeah. And they continued to do so for 4 years. I mean, the last horror title was in 1956, but then after they did those magazines, they did some paperbacks in the
yeah
60s, and they hooked up with Russ Cochran. Now, it wasn't necessarily new material, but I mean, he put out the reprints of the old ones in deluxe box sets and all that stuff. And there is portfolios. They made a Tales from the Crypt and a Vault of Horror movie in the early 70s. And there's a TV show later on, a cartoon show, and all that stuff. So EC as an entity has always existed, and they're always doing new things. They're even doing a brand new EC series with new artists and writers now. Some people are consider that sacrilege, and it's like, well, you don't have to buy it. I mean, Paper Cuts did a version
yeah.
about 10 years ago or so, and the
They
art
still
was
make
kind of
it
so-so, and that was the problem
it
with that series, I thought. But anyway,
makes more sense why it's sacrilege. People still make that. They still make Batman comics. They still make Spider-Man
yeah,
comics, and they
yeah,
still make Mickey Mouse cartoons. Who
yeah.
cares? And nobody.
I don't know. It just seems to be the bane of people's existence that there's reboots on things. My attitude is check out the reboot if you like it. If you don't have any interest, don't bother
Now,
with it.
one of the
So,
questions I do have a problem with is that EC has been publishing Fantagraphic Books has been publishing. Hold on, let me grab one.
okay. I probably have an answer for you. Yeah, these.
Has been publishing these books constantly,
Yeah,
and they've been doing the complete EC library. If the complete EC library does not include the early issues of Mad.
yeah.
Why is that, Mark? Tell
In,
us, Mark.
in this series, or are you talking about
Yeah,
the okay? So the Fantagraphic series, basically the Fantagraphic series redoes the Cochrane series by
yeah,
artist. That's really what it is for most part. So you're going to get a book about Jack Kamen, a book about John Severin, a book about Harvey Kurtzman, a book about blah blah.
yeah.
Um, which is
This one
which is
is
really neat. So
Hirschman.
if you're a big fan of Graham Engels, let's say, and Ghastly, um, and you just want to see his stories and not bother with the
Yep.
Davis and the Kamen and the Craig stories in the same issue of Tales from the Crypt or whatever, then these are the books for you. Now,
But they have reprinted Panic, which drives me
yeah,
crazy. Why don't they reissue Mad? Because
because
Cochrane did all of it.
Panic and Mad are like two different things, even to this day. Even when Russ Cochran reprinted, I was talking to a friend Lee about this the other day because um, Mad's always been treated separately every time they've reprinted it since the early 1970s because that's when really William Gaines needed to kind of get everything kind of under control because Kurtzman was saying he owned everything. Feldstein had a stake in it. Gaines just had to get it all under control, which he did. This is in time for that 1972, that infamous 1972 convention in New York that Jerry Beck went to. So you can ask him about it more. But basically, it boiled down to the way it worked is, and it actually even has genesis in 1961 when Gaines sold off MAD to Premier Industries, and he kept all the other stuff. A lot of people don't know that, and so it became split at that point. So the MAD stuff went through Premier, eventually got hooked up with Warner Brothers and DC and all the other stuff that you hear to this day. It's still listed because I had to talk to Mad's lawyer to do my Mad book. It's still considered EC Publications Inc. after
Hmm.
all this time. So I had it written in my copyright statement in my book, and he made me change it. It was a division of DC Comics and Warner Brothers Discovery, and they got it's not. So even after all this day, even though Mad is now in Burbank, headquartered at DC Comics headquarters, right around the corner from Warner Brothers Studios and everything. It's all nice and tidy in Burbank. It's still its own thing. So it could literally be separated off and sold to somebody else, um,
What drives
for
me crazy also
copyright reasons. Now, I
is
didn't quite
that
answer your question, but go ahead. What was it?
continue. I'm sorry.
Okay, so on the other side of it is everything else. Those got changed to being copyright William M. Gaines agent. They
Hmm.
weren't really under the EC banner anymore, even though it's still EC also. Um, so all that stuff is kind of like in a big clump, and then you got Mad. And so like when Cochran went to reprint Mad, they had to do it differently than they did the others. Like when Weird Science came out, you got a Weird Science library set with 4 volumes in a case, and there it was, black and white. With Mad, they put out volume 1, and then a few months later, volume 2, and a few months later, volume 3, and a few months later, volume 4 with the box. And they did that one in color because they thought, oh, everybody wants to see it in color. I wanted to see it in black and white. I had no idea they did a black and white set. And so I only got the black and white set recently, but I'm missing a volume 2. And I found out that volume 2, because they issued them all separately, is really hard to find, which is really bizarre and odd and everything
Yeah,
like that.
there's a lot of books
Um,
like that where
but
like there's a random volume in the middle of a set that doesn't.
so the thing is, so the mads, the spines sometimes are faded. They don't fit in the box very well and stuff like that because they did it differently. And then a few years later, they reprinted them in magazine format, like the Super Special. And a few years later, they did them digitally. And, to this day, Mad does weird things with those things. I would love to combine Mad and Panic together because the material is very similar. And it has the same artist, but, apparently never the twain shall meet, at least in our lifetimes. From I don't know. Maybe when it becomes public domain, it may switch, but for now, we're kind of stuck with the way it is unless somebody sells something. So, and that's the basic story.
It
So,
drives me crazy that I can't buy the Mad Archives or the Cochrane series because I want what I'm looking for is the original Kurtzman because the first 23 issues were in color, so those are the issues and it cost like $400 to get the box set. I think something like that. It's
yeah,
expensive.
yeah,
Both of them do. And I'm like, I can't afford that.
yeah. And then
So
DC
it's
issued them again a few years later.
and
So,
those cost $500 a piece too.
yeah.
DC
Um,
is now, I think, next month they're doing their famous first edition books.
yeah. Mhm.
They're famous. They're doing Mad #1. I think is their next
Yeah.
month's issue. I think something like that.
Yeah, like in June or something. So yeah.
Yeah,
And I'll probably buy it for the umpteenth time.
yeah.
but yeah, there's always a weird separation thing. It's just like when I did my book. It's like it shouldn't matter that I use. I had to change the logo. That's not the Real Mad logo. I had the Real Mad logo on here, and the guy made me change it, saying that's a trademark logo, you can't have it. Also, and I anticipated this. I couldn't show Alfred on the cover. Now Alfred itself, the image, which I'll show you the back cover here. The whole
Mhm.
toothless grin character, you know, is in the public domain. But this version that Norman Mingo made and other people imitated, that's copyrighted and trademarked and stuff like that. It's a fine line. It's kind of weird, but I didn't want to argue with the lawyer. But I had the bag over the head, and he wanted me to have the artist fix the bag and put it over the mouth too. But then this was a fixed image, so we couldn't change it very easily, and he
But
let
you
it
got
go.
that from Lee Hester, correct?
Yeah,
Lee's comics.
originally this is a Jack Davis original from Lee Hester for Lee's Comics. It doesn't have any Alfred head. In fact, I had to show the lawyer. I sent him the original with Lee's head on it. I said it had nothing to do with Mad. I mean, it does say Mad down here in one of the comic book covers, but it was for a comic book sale that Lee did way back when, I don't know, 30 years ago. And he's used it in advertising ever since. But it's Lee sitting here. That's him, sitting with, the smoking jacket and, car in the back. And, this is Palo Alto, California, tall tree, whatever. Uh, anyway, there we go. That's, and he was selling the Palo Alto collection. That was what it was for. And so a big collection of comics.
And now now the origins of Mad, let's just talk about how Mad started. Like why create well, at the time a comic book?
The story that is considered true after all these years, because there's different stories that came out and I had to research and get the right one, um, is that Kurtzman was kind of jealous of Al Feldstein because Al Feldstein was editing Tales from the Crypt and Weird Science and Weird Fantasy and Vault of Horror and Hanafir, and I think that was it at the time, maybe one more. There was 7 titles. And Kurtzman was editing Two Fisted Tales and Frontline Combat. And
Yeah.
so Gaines suggested I'm not going to give you a raise, because if I give you a raise, I'll have to give Feldstein a raise. And he's doing more work than you. Sorry. He said, why don't you do a third title and make it a humor title? You did those Hey Look pages back at Marvel
Yeah.
or Timely or whatever. And so you have a sense of humor. You could dash it out in a week and work on the war books like you normally do. Of course, Kurtzman not being one to just do things and dash it out, Mad suddenly became the full-time job, and soon frontline combat went away, and Two Fisted Tales got sent over to John Severin, but that took a while. But but initially, the idea was you can increase your income by a third or whatever by just adding a third title and make it a humor title that'll be quick and easy to do. And he said, "All right, I'll do that," and he did. So.
And Mad originally was not even parody at the very beginning.
Well, it wasn't parody of specific things, it was
Right.
parody of genre. So, the first issue has Ganis, which is a Yiddish term for, mobsters or, disreputable people. And,
Mhm.
so that's a parody of their crime title. Then they had, I can't remember all the ones. There's a science fiction one in there. I forgot the name of it. I'd have to look it up. And then there's a horror story and, like an adventure story, and they're one's done by, like, the Ganis was done by Bill Elder, whatever. Jack Davis did the one of them, John Severin did one of them, and Wally Wood did one of them. So,
Mhm.
and that's how it kind of was for the first 2 or 3 issues. Although in the second issue, this is the first time they did a specific parody. They did a parody of Tarzan,
Mhm.
called it Melvin, but it took till like the fourth issue where they did a specific parody that was really specific to a specific character that originated in comic books, and that's the Superman one where they did Super Duper
Yeah.
Man. But
Which
prior to
they were
that,
also parodying the Captain Marvel. They were
oh,
also parodying the
yeah,
Captain Marvel rivalry.
there's that controversy going on at that time, and that was one of the things that Kurtzman did that was wise, that was carried on by other Mad writers and everything, is to be semi-topical in your parody. So
Mhm.
that Captain Marvel Superman disagreement was going on at the time. So what better way have them fight each other in a comic? So,
Now, did a lot of did Mad find a different audience, or a lot of Mad's audience EC fans that just gravitated towards Mad, do you think?
Um, well, my dad read Mad originally. I'll just go by him. Um, he read comics when he was little and everything, but by the time Mad came around, he was 14 years old. So his interest in like, Dell comics and all that type of stuff was kind of on the wane by that point. But he was reading the occasional EC, the Tales from the Crypt and all that stuff. So obviously people that were already reading ECs would have been aware of Mad because they advertised Mad and promoted it in the other titles ahead of time. You got the same artists and writers, so it's like, hey, I'll give it a chance. Humor, my dad always liked humor, so he was there. My dad always claimed he got every one of the comic book issues. He never kept them, unfortunately. I had to rebuy them years later. And he says, "Oh, they weren't worth anything." And I go, "I would have kept them because they're funny." It's like I didn't care they're worth
Mm.
money, but c'est la vie. It's like I got them since, and I enjoy them now. So, um, but I'm sure Mad got new and EC got new readers over time. Like the Super Duper Man one is a perfect example. I don't think those were EC fans just suddenly, ooh, Super Duper Man. It was DC fans or National Periodical Publication fans. Oh, they're parodying one of my
Yeah.
favorite characters, and then later they did Batboy and Ruben, they did Woman Wonder and all the other ones, Black and Blue Hawks and blah blah blah. So, they went through all the superheroes that were around at the time practically.
And now we can pretty much definitively say, like Bill Shelley's title of Bill Shelley's Kurtzman's biography that Bill Shelley wrote, Harvey Kurtzman was the creator of Mad.
Yes, I will say that. I mean, you can give Gaines a co-credit, but it's not a 50-50 thing. Gaines basically said,
Yeah,
humor, do a humor book. So that's the extent of his creation. And he published the thing. So I mean, it's like so it was an avenue for it to be published, but it was really Kurtzman's baby, you know.
but I mean,
Um,
Schlesinger produced the Warner Brothers characters, but we don't credit him with the creation of.
Right. Now, there was a time, admittedly, and I talk about it in the book, especially when Kurtzman and Gaines were having their friction in the late 50s, that Gaines started taking control, and like the first few paperbacks say, William M. Gaines is utterly mad, and William M. Gaines is the brothers mad. They're putting his name on the book, and like he wrote and drew it all like Walt Disney. So they had
Yeah,
some friction from the mid 50s into the early 70s,
or
but then they
or
they
like
finally got
the
resolved. Yeah.
the
So
Mad World of William N. Gaines.
yeah, that was about the time that they were getting it resolved when that book came out, which is 72. So but yeah, they didn't speak to each other for over a decade. So
Yeah, why did Kurtzman leave Mad? Because well, let's ask one question first.
okay.
What converted Mad from what led the Mad to switch to black and white? Because the year that you were talking about, you wanted the first issues in black and white, but I'm like, well, weren't they originally printed in color?
Yeah, but I wanted those Cochrane reprints in black and white because the other Cochrane volumes were in black and white, and I was buying them for having large size blow-ups of the original art so I could look at the art so that wasn't obscured by cheap four color press coloring. I wanted to see the line work and everything. And other than in the cheap paperbacks, none of the original Mad comic books ever appeared in black and white. They always appeared in color. So um it's just a personal preference. I don't mind them in color. It's just, but then you go, well, what about the other ones in color? Well, they eventually did reissue them in color too. So, um,
The first 23 issues were printed in color. That's why I'm asking
yeah,
why
they
switch to
were.
black and white in the first
Well,
place.
just to look at the line work of the art. It was
Yeah,
just it's just purely aesthetic reasons. If you're just a general comic book fan, just want to read the stories for fun, it shouldn't matter if they're in color or black and white. You're just reading them for entertainment
no,
value.
but why
So,
did they switch it to black and
oh,
white?
to black and white. Okay, well, that's it wasn't a switch per se to black and white per se as much as uh Now, I'll tell you the wrong story first because everybody thinks the wrong story is that Mad switched to a magazine because to avoid the comics code. That's not true at
Yeah,
all. Okay,
right.
let's get that out of the way.
That's what I used to believe. That's what I
Well, a lot of
thought.
people did,
That,
and you know,
that's
I've
the
had
story that I had always read.
I've had professionals tell me so, and it's like it's wrong. So the reality is, Kurtzman never thought comic books were considered highbrow entertainment. You know, magazines or slicks is what they were called, was considered, you know, where it's at, you know. And you know, I think I've told you before, it's like everybody aspired to be have a comic strip in the newspaper rather than have a comic page or whatever, a comic story in a comic book. Comic books weren't considered
Right.
quality entertainment. So,
Which is why
you know,
people like Will Eisner was so praised among
yeah,
his peers because he was doing exactly what they were doing in comic books, but in a comic strip as well.
yeah. And he managed to get Spirit in newspapers as its own section. So he did
Yeah.
well. Um, so anyway, uh, New York at the time was a pretty small place when it comes to publishing. All the publishers knew everybody. And Kurtzman was friends with the publisher of Pageant magazine, which is a little Reader's Digest type magazine, doesn't exist anymore. And he was going to bail out and do that magazine, work for that magazine. But he said, you know, at that time, Gaines didn't want him to go. He says, well, what can I do to make you stay? And he says, well, can I turn Mad from a comic book into a slick or a magazine? And he goes, yeah, let me think about it. And so, you know, he crunched the numbers and he basically said, I can do it as a magazine if provided that you do it in black and white, because I can't really afford to switch it to magazine, because right now in black and white we're jumping it from a dime to 25 cents. If we put it in color, and a lot of magazines weren't in color back then, it would have been 50 cents, you know. So you know, it was a big enough gamble to expect the current Mad reader to jump from paying a dime for something to 25 cents, even though it was bigger and more pages and everything. It was still a big gamble. Turned out it paid off. It didn't pay off. No, going to back to my dad, it didn't pay off for my dad. My dad saw the first magazine issue and bought it. He didn't like it. He says, this isn't like the comic book, and he stopped buying them.
Yeah. You think, but in your personal opinion,
Yeah,
now this is going to be a tough question, and the answer could be it depends because this
yeah.
might not be a fair question. But do you think the public or yourself thought the comic book would have been improved from comic book to magazine format?
What do you mean? You mean making
You
a
think
comic book
making it
like
making
creepy or
making
something?
you think making it you think switching from comic book to magazine format improved it?
It improved it sales wise. I don't know if it improved it content wise. Um, because there's something to be said. I mean, there are purists, mad purists out there that only like the first 23 issues or will extend it to the first 28 issues because those are the Kurtzman ones. And any other Mad is a poor imitation. But I'm not one of
Yeah,
those. I'm not one of those. I do like what they did on the comics, but I have a feeling had they kept it a comic book, well, first of all, they would have gone through the comics code. Kurtzman would have been driven nuts by that. Um, and if the rest of the EC line was gone by 1956, well, Mad probably would have gone with them, just like Panic did, and everything else. So, and that would have been the end of it. He would have either switched to another company, he probably would have gone back to Timely or something, or just gone out of the business. He went a different direction, which we can cover later. So, you know, but anyway, so that's what he did at that time. The magazine saved it by becoming a magazine financially. So,
yeah. My my favorite era of Mad,
mhm,
I really like the Feldstein era later, but I think
mhm,
my favorite of Mad era of Mad is the Kurtzman era, just because it's just so unique.
mhm.
But I know there are also purists who just like the '60s Mad. I know.
Yeah, yeah. There's always some arbitrary cutoff, like when Mad became 30 cents, when Mad started putting color in the inside of the covers, when Mad became 35 cents, when Mad gained 40 cents, you know,
Right.
when they stopped doing parodies of uh, or they geared it down towards kids when they whatever, it's like there's always some arbitrary cutoff time. um
A lot of those cutoffs make no sense to me.
I mean, I still read Mad to this day, even in reprint form, and have appreciated and liked every version of Mad. But I would say if I really had to pick a favorite time, it would be the beginning to like issue 254 or something when Feldstein ended. And
Hmm.
it's just arbitrary because I would say Feldstein's best days were already past him by 1984. I think he was good until about 1980, and I was reading it regularly then, and I did see a noticeable drop off in quality just because I mean the man was getting older. He was older than I am now, writing stuff towards kids, and it's hard enough to keep up with the current trends. But I have this story in there. Dick DeBartolo told me he would submit these articles because DeBartolo is a lot younger. He would submit stories about disco music and everything, and Feldstein kept rejecting him. And so he talked to Gaines about it, and Gaines went to Feldstein. He says, "Well, I don't know what this disco stuff. I don't follow this stuff. So it'd be like doing a bunch of articles now about Taylor Swift. I don't know who Taylor Swift is. I don't watch her, listen to her music or whatever. So um, that was a situation. I mean, this is a long ass story that's not related to your question, but that was a situation where Gaines said, "Well, you know what it's about. Do your own version." And they did a little standalone special called Mad Disco. So that was kind of like the beginning of the end for Feldstein because he was kind of becoming anachronistic. He wasn't hip and with it with the kids anymore. He's getting into his 60s, and yeah, and I think he knew it. And
Yeah.
there's other reasons he said why he quit, but they got younger people, and it's just the nature of the business on comedy. It's a young man's game, So
What led Kurtzman to leave Mad?
Kurtzman did, Kurtzman got dissatisfied really quickly, so he got the magazine, and they were publishing it. He did 4 issues like in the first year. And managed to keep it on his schedule. Um, then he got an offer from Hugh Hefner of Playboy fame. Why don't you come over here and I can make Mad into a color magazine? And, color is what he wanted. And so rather than just going back to Gaines and saying, "Hey, if you switch it to color, I'll stay," he just basically said, "I want 51% of Mad."
Mad.
And
And
so suddenly he would make Gaines a minor shareholder in his own company, which is ridiculous. So Gaines wasn't going to do that, even though Mad was really his only bread and butter at that point. So um, he said no, and let Kurtzman walk. So
Kurtzman in that magazine was Trump, right?
Trump, yeah. And unfortunately, Kurtzman, the famous quotes in the book too, is Hugh Hefner said, uh, I gave Kurtzman a budget and he definitely outspent it or something to that effect. It's like, or
Trump lasted
no,
two issues,
an
didn't it?
unlimited budget, and he outspent it. Um, so
Didn't Kurtzman go back to Mad eventually?
he did when Feldstein left, you know, and um, somebody asked him, and there's a quote in the book. It's something like this about going back to Mad, and he goes, "It's like going back to an old shit." He really wasn't thrilled about going back to Mad at that point, but obviously he had enough friction with Feldstein, as did a lot of people, that he did not try to come back until after Feldstein left. So
Who is the person from the original Gang of Idiots that stayed the longest? I imagine Sergio is the person who has the longest tenure now,
yeah,
but who is the person? Because I think the reprints still have new Sergio material, don't they?
yeah, he still sends in marginals. Um,
But who is the person who had the longest tenure of that original group? Because Wally Wood didn't last very long, and neither did.
well, okay, it depends on what you're talking about. I would say of the original group, then you'd probably have to pick Davis, even though he left for 10 years. Um,
Right.
Davis came in at the beginning, and then he left when Kurtzman left with everybody.
Mhm.
Wood was on the fence and eventually decided to go back with Mad because um, there was pressure on either side for him to choose sides. He didn't want to. He figured he could write for both, but there was some unwritten rule he couldn't do comics for both publications. So he chose Mad because he figured Gaines, supported him before Mad and was still supporting him. Why turn your back on it? The whole Trump thing with Hefner and everything was a little bit untested, and it only lasted 2 issues, so he was right. um, Whereas there was Wood was with EC for like all told like 14 years, I think, from 1950 to 64. So you know he was the longest of the originals that went straight through, but Davis left in 56, but he came back in 65 and kept on to like 96 or something like that. So that would be the longest of
Of
the original guys.
of the Mad artists in general who are known for Mad, who had the most success outside of Mad?
Oh, Jack Davis for sure.
No, I mean
Um,
just in general, like of all the Mad artists.
yeah, it'd be Jack Davis. I mean, as far as wealth and fame, I mean, people
Yeah.
knew of Jack Davis outside of Mad. You couldn't even say that like about say Mort Drucker or something, but unless you're a Mad reader, you didn't necessarily know his name. People saw Jack Davis's name on the cover of TV Guide. They saw it on Time Magazine. They saw it on album covers, and he was making big money from that stuff. When he was invited to go back to Mad in '65, he didn't have to go back to Mad. You know, he just chose to out of loyalty. It was like a family, so everybody kind of liked each other, and so it was just the way Mad was at that time. They went on trips together and all sorts of things. So you know.
Was Wally Wood the only artist of that original group that had a really successful career outside of Mad? Of in comic books, I'm referring to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because
Because
Davis
Wood obviously
Davis didn't
created
have so
Daredevil,
much
and
in comic books. Yeah. Of
because
the
Wood
original,
obviously created Daredevil, and did all sorts of different
yeah, I
stuff.
would say you're probably right. Wally Wood was probably the most successful original Mad person in other comic books because even Severin, even though he did other comic books, John Severin, um, he eventually just kind of well, it's a toss up. Yeah, it could be John Severin because John Severin, although he only did 10 issues, the first 10 issues of Mad, he did do a lot of stuff, Incredible Hulk, and
Mhm.
he didn't just do Cracked, even though that's primarily what he did. He did Batlash, he did a bunch of other stuff. So, it's a toss up of what you consider success or not success outside of between Wally Wood or John Severin. So
Now, of the people who came later, who do you think are the most notable later artists or writers of Mad? Now, by the way, I want to ask one thing. Why is it now? I like Basil Wolverton just as much as the next guy is, but why is it that he's routinely credited as the Mad artist, when he only did like 4 or 5 issues of Mad?
I don't know. I mean, well, I mean, anybody once they're a mad artist, they're a mad artist. But it's like it's kind of you know just because they did something. But Wolverton it's just ignorance that a lot of people don't know that Wolverton did a lot of comic book work prior to Mad.
Hmm.
He did stuff for Fawcett for years, like the Culture Corner and Powerhouse Pepper and things like that. And he did. The famous Lean of the Hyena thing for Little Abner and stuff like that. All that was pre-Mad, so um yeah, it's you know, just like everything else, like the comics code thing, it's just ignorance. They don't know. And somebody says it, and so therefore it is, but it's not necessarily correct. So
Now, who do you think are the most notable artists outside of that original group
um
that worked for Mad in general?
that's a hard question because there's a lot of people that um worked for Mad over the years that
All right, let me rephrase this. If you were going to make your like Mount Rushmore of the four most important artists of Mad outside of the original group, who would you say?
oh geez. Um, well, I mean, like Kelly Freas was known for science fiction work and stuff like that. He even did an album cover himself. So it's like um he's kind of like one of those that would be up there as that type of artist. Mingo wasn't really known in comic book world, but I mean, Norman Mingo did advertising campaigns during the 40s and 50s that were
No,
really good.
I think
But
you're
what
misframing the
do you
question. I was just let me rephrase this. Out of the people who worked on Mad in general, who would be your four most important people for their work in Mad?
for the work in Man? Well, it still might be those two because they're the most visible. They typically did the covers.
Mhm.
Um, you have to pick Don Martin, even though Don Martin. It's interesting about Don Martin. I could go into it later. I mean, I love the guy's stuff, but um, and you know, you couldn't just have four
Just have
people.
four people. Yeah.
um, Davis, Jaffe, Aragones, you know, but even minor people were like John Cullen Murphy did two things for Mad, just two. It's like, so it's like, well, they weren't the best things he ever did in his career, but he's well known. So I don't know it. And then some people went on. The interesting thing, to answer one of your questions that didn't quite get answered, in the more current times, a lot of artists went on to like children's books and cartoons and stuff like that for Nickelodeon and stuff like that. So Mad ceased to be like the be all end all and just a stepping stone to something greater. So
Now, now I'm going to ask you a few questions about Mad's fandom.
mhm.
A lot of fandom of Mad is just people insulting Mad. A lot of the letters written to Mad that are published were occasionally insults of Mad.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Were
Mad kind
those?
of started that, and certainly Feldstein promoted that. The self-deprecating thing is like the
Yeah.
modus operandi for Mad. It's like nowadays, the way we are in our culture, it's like, oh, you shouldn't make fun of anything, even yourself. It's like, but the way I grew up with Mad is, if you make fun of yourself, you've beaten somebody else to it. It's
Hmm.
like you can't make fun of me if I've already poked a hole in my balloon. It's like, but some people don't see it that way, but I that's what
I'm
Mads.
a big fan of self-deprecation, so
Yeah,
I will say.
yeah, but not everyone is on current. You get it, but a lot of people nowadays, oh, you shouldn't even make fun of yourself. That's you
Yeah.
get into psychotherapy and everything. It's like, oh, there must be some reason why you're self-deprecating and belittling yourself. You should always promote your achievements and everything. But you know what? That's not funny. That's really what it boils down to.
One
If
moment, one moment.
what happened? Oh, okay. You went silent.
All right.
Silent
Yeah.
movie. Okay.
So now, who of the people was anybody ever offended by their response by Mad?
In what way? I'm not sure what you mean.
Did anybody get portrayed in Mad that were not pleased?
Well,
Like with lawsuits or something
yeah,
like
there's a
that?
lot of lawsuits, and I do talk about them in the book. I mean, not necessarily for public personas, but I mean, the most infamous one, which kind of changed how copyrights work and parody and everything, was with this. They did this little pamphlet, sing along with Mad insert about 1961 or so, and
Hmm.
Frank Jacobs was the writer, and he rewrote lyrics to famous tunes, and he would say, "Sung to the tune of White Christmas" or something like that. It
Hmm.
it didn't have the notes there. It didn't have the real lyrics there. It was like, instead of White Christmas, I'm making it up. It would be Blight Christmas. I'm dreaming of a blight Christmas, whatever. So it was similar, but not exact. But Irving Berlin, the writer of that song, and a bunch of other people filed suit against Mad, saying, "You're stealing our song." and it went through a couple different appeals and everything, but everybody basically boiled it down to that it's parody, and there's no music, like musical notes being printed.
Hmm.
So parody was allowed. It was a landslide. It was a not landslide. What's the word? Landmark case. That it allowed people. I mean, it was kind of assumed people could do parody, but it wasn't set in stone, as it were, with legalese saying you could do it. Like when they did Super Duper Man, they didn't consult anybody. They didn't call up National Periodical publications. Hey, we're going to do a parody of your character. Is that all right? They just did it,
Hmm.
and there was no rhyme or reason whether that would work or not, until after it came out. Then somebody got offended by it, saying, "Hey, you can't make fun of Superman. He's pure and blah 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 blah." And it's like, well, it's not Superman because we changed the name and we're making
Did people get offended by Super Duper Man?
DC did. you know
It's interesting that DC owns that
well,
comic
they
book.
didn't
They
at the
publish that
time, but
all the
yeah, it's
time.
the irony of it all. So if you see the later parody of Batboy and Ruben in like issue, I don't know what issue it's in, they said they put specifically, this is a parody, it's a lampoon, whatever. It's, if you want to spend your dime on junk like this, go ahead, but or buy the original, or something like that. So it's actually giving a plug that if you don't want this garbage parody, go buy a real Batman comic. So you know it
Who
kind of
who
it kind of helped.
who had who was who of people parodied? Who are some of the notable people who are parodied that liked their parody?
Well, a lot of people have liked their parodies over the years. I mean, Weird Al is a Weird Al Yankovic's like a big supporter of Mad, and they've parodied him over the years, and he even edited an issue, so he must respect it. Um, Charles Schultz, it was kind of a mutual appreciation. He loved Mad. Mad loved to parody Peanuts, although one time uh maybe they went a little too far or too frequent, and Charles Schultz sent in a drawing of Snoopy and said basically, "Hey, you guys seem to be doing this pretty frequently. Why don't you just take over and I can retire?" That was like in the early '70s, and they printed it on the letters page, so it was kind of funny. But for the most part, I think everybody was appreciative. Not too many people were like,
Mm-hmm.
Um, the people that would get offended typically, um, and I can't think of the name of it, but it'd be the equivalent of really right wing people now. The John Birch Society, they got really offended about something that Mad did in the early '60s, and that's the equivalent of something now. These
The
people,
people it's interesting, the same people who would go, the same group of people who years before were the McCarthy people getting offended by EC.
yeah, exactly. So it's the same group of people over the years. It's just a different name, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They were called McCarthyism then or whatever. Now it's Trumpers or whatever. It's
Was
like
was Mad mentioned in Seduction of the Innocent? That's an honest question. I don't know.
I don't think it was. And
But I
it
know
wasn't.
like the very first issue mentioned was like issues of race, a Bugs Bunny issue from Dell was mentioned.
Because I think Mad was still a little bit under the radar when he was writing that book. It was out, but
Mm-hmm.
when it came out, the big focus was on the horror and the crime comics. It wasn't on
Big
everything
focus,
else.
particular like the picture, one of the, I know the biggest thing for Wortham was the, I forget which issue, what's the issue number, but the EC comic where the woman's head is cut off.
Oh yeah,
That was the big, that was the big, if you've ever read, it's not a book, it's just an article, Carol Tilley's book, article on the seduction of the innocent
yeah,
in Frederick Wortham. That's like, that was the big tell all issue of anything that made him mad.
yeah. And it's kind of funny. I mean, there are images of inside interiors in that book, but a lot of it seems to have been really complaints about the covers. It's almost like if they toned down the covers, they probably could have continued on with the same stories inside.
Yeah. I know that like they got mad. One of the only issue of a Dell comic that they got mad is, you know, the issue of Bugs Bunny that where it's like the diamond in the rabbit, he's like holding an issue of a diamond and there's like this racist character in the background.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the first things mentioned, like the first
Hmm.
chapter of the thing that was says this is bad.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah. They didn't ignore the rest of the genres, but I don't think they cited
no,
Mad.
like they
It's
mentioned
been a
like
while
you know,
since I've read Seduction of the Innocent, but I don't think they cited Mad or Panic specifically.
yeah, I
They
know
kind
they
of,
mentioned like they said Superman was a fascist, Batman was
yeah,
gay, you know, Wonder Woman represented women's empowerment, you know.
yeah.
Which that for me was the dumbest example of like why.
And admittedly,
Like
it's Seduction of the Innocent is a hard book to read. It's very difficult to read.
yeah,
It's no page turner, I'll tell you that. It just kind of,
no,
after you get through about 50 pages, you get it. Okay, this guy has a little beef about comic books and they shouldn't be read by kids. Okay, I get it. But he continues on for like 300 more pages to say basically the same thing. And
yeah,
the only really high point for most people is just the images that they include inside, the centerfold, whatever. Um, and that bibliography list that sometimes in books is sometimes not. I have my copy, we had it uh, cut out, but I found a copy of it and photocopied it and stuck it in the book. So mine has it in there now.
mm.
So,
Now what do you think? Now I'm going to ask you a bit about the fan. So the fan mail of Mad seems to frequently be like you told me in a message that unlike a lot of the parodies, the other copycats of Mad didn't typically make its own fan mail and fake it.
right. I think they did in one or two cases, and you could usually tell it'll be a letter signed by President Eisenhower or something, or I'm making it up, but
Yeah,
it's like obviously he has no time or business reading, a Mad magazine. But for the most part, um, Mad was actually legitimately read by people, and even as a fan, and when I was a kid, it was like considered kind of like a um, whatever, a source of honor and respect. If you got a letter in Mad, is really difficult to get a letter in Mad because people
you tried.
tried, you know. And I never got a letter in Mad. I did get a letter in Crazy once, which is kind of ironic and funny. Uh, but the only reason I know that the letters were faked in Crazy and cracked and things like that. First of all, I was told so by Michael Rosigliano because he was an artist that worked for both publications, and he said that was part of his job is to write fake letters. Um, and he said mainly the reason was is a lot of the letters that really legitimately came into Cracked and Crazy were of a younger age, and the letters weren't very coherent necessarily, you know, or
There,
interesting. It'd be written in crayon and saying, I love your magazine. Well, you can't print 30 letters just saying, I love your magazine, so,
there's an
uh,
issue of Crazy or Sick. It might be Sick
mm.
where and I use this in my article where it says you're basically copying what Mad and Crack did. You're doing everything that Mad and Crack do, but you're just making it worse. This is a real letter somebody sent in. You can tell it's real. And he says, why are you just copying and just being rip off with everything Mad and Crack did? He says, and the response was, I think it was Sick. He says, I just want you to know that before we call the offices of Mad and Crack before each issue is published to make sure that they're doing the same thing we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that
Yeah.
was one of the good things about the publications. I think Mad carried it off the best is
What
that they responded to all the letters in on the page and tried to make some sort of jokey answer, which usually worked. Sometimes didn't, but anyway.
I have a quick question because I know now this would be a little bit forbidden and like publication wise.
Mhm.
When Mad had to put a barcode on their magazines,
Yeah.
they made jokes about it on the top.
Yeah.
When did they stop that because they were told to stop that? Or
Nah, I think they just stopped because they ran out of material. There's only so many jokes they could do. And every so often they'd come back with another one. It was never
Yeah.
a definitive cutoff. Like I think the issue that has the barcode is 198, and they certainly did barcode jokes for the next 100 issues. But
What
after that, it was just sporadic and just if they thought of something, you know.
what do you think are the most notable issues of Matt? Individual issues, and you can also refer to let's make this the most notable storylines of Mad and then the most notable covers of Mad because those are
Oh,
two different.
geez, that's a lot. I mean, we're talking about almost 600 issues of just the regular Mad. And then you know, there's various specials and annuals. If you're just talking regular Mad, oh, let's see. Notable issues are just ones. You know, they have like 10 covers that even Mad calls the soul of Mad, and most of them are just Alfred pictures of him doing
There's like
something, like eating
I
corn on the cob, and there's a line of uneaten kernels because his gap tooth didn't chew. Or there's another one where he's running for president and the hat's smashed on his head,
mm,
and things like that. So there's like 10 of those covers. Generally, those are considered like the classic covers. I mean, certain ones that are like favorites for me on covers is like they did when this is the bicentennial, they did Alfred as George Washington with the unfinished portrait. I liked Who Needs You instead of I Want You for the Army recruiting poster. um, there's
I
a
know
lot
the
of,
one with the middle finger got a lot of flack.
yeah, the middle finger, strangely enough, is memorable anyway. But you know, there's a long story for that one. I do talk about it in the book. And you know, originally it was just like a throwaway gag. They weren't planning to do it, and then suddenly they said, let's do it, it's great. um and they got in trouble for it. A part of the reason is they changed the original joke. The original joke was supposed to be Mad number one in good taste, which was funnier than the number one magazine, which is what it became. Al Feldstein defended the change, that it wouldn't have been funny with either, but you know, I think it would have been funnier as number one in good taste. But there was a time, and that's when Mad did it. And it was during the early 70s. National Lampoon had started in 1970, and they were trying to just push the envelope as far as they could go. Now, Lampoon obviously won. I mean, it had nudity and bad language and everything else in it, and things that were they couldn't even print nowadays. You know, racist stuff, sexist stuff, whatever stuff. You know, but Mad, because they knew that this is like pretty good competition because it wasn't kind of lightweight stuff that Cracked or Sick was doing. Lampoon was a serious threat. It was monthly. It had advertising. People were buying it, and so Mad had to kind of counteract. And so they did like poster inserts of Vietnam War atrocities and things like that. And they pushed the envelope from like 70 to 74. I think they stopped after 74 because a lot of things ended when Watergate ended, but a lot of it had to do with Lampoon's original staff. A lot of them left by the mid 70s to go to Saturday Night Live and other things. And so Mad kind of lightened up a little bit after that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers what you're saying,
Now,
but yeah.
now I have a list of copycats of Mad. You can argue that some of these are not copycats, like we've talked, but here is a list that people said are the copycats of Mad, and there are a lot more.
Mhm,
Okay, and because we're gonna get on the Mad copycats now
mhm,
topic now, which you are you are the foremost expert on a couple of these.
mhm.
Okay, well, here we have the list. Like these are obviously not all of them. Not brand Eck, cracked, crazy, sick, get lost, panic, Trump, humbug, whack, madhouse, bughouse, wild, zany, loco, trash.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, there's more than that, but
I
okay,
know there's
that's a
more
lot
than
of them.
that, but that's the list. That's the list that somebody made
Yeah,
that I copied.
that's a pretty good list. I would say it's probably the most notable ones, you know, because
Obviously, a couple of these are not really mad
yeah, I mean, you could go
ripoffs.
on and add, you know, ones that came out over the years like Parody and Wacko, and
Gag,
you know, there's a bunch, but you know, it's like
gag.
the most. the longest lasting ones, Mad was obviously the longest. Cracked would be the next longest at 45 years.
Hmm.
Mad's over 70 years. Then Sick had a run of 21 years, 20 years,
Crazy.
and Crazy was 10 years. And then everything else, Help, which is the Kurtzman title, was 5 years. And everything else is like 3 years or less, and sometimes three issues or less. So
Only ones that are well known are the ones that either had a lot of issues
yeah,
or were written or developed by one of the EC artists, like Panic, Help, Humbug, and Trump are all I would say fairly well known,
yeah,
but that's because they were under Kurtzman.
yeah. And people, Kurtzman had his followers, so whatever Kurtzman did, people followed him. So whatever he did
Yeah,
next, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I have all the issues of Help and Humbug and
yeah, yeah,
blah
yeah.
blah, and it's like because it's him, it's Kurtzman. Now, did everything Kurtzman do was that gold? Well, some people might say everything he touched was gold. There's some things I don't really care for as much, like his Jungle Book and stuff. It's all right, and the Grasshopper and the whatever it is, and From Arg to Zap, and yeah, there's okay, but it's like for the most part, Kurtzman had a pretty good track record. Everything he touched was pretty much gold.
Now, what were the differences between the fan bases of I mean, it's ironic though that the only magazine on that list that had any sort of real following was Cracked.
Yeah.
How did a magazine like first of all, let's talk about why was Cracked created? This is also my own question. This is a totally different topic that you've already discussed. I don't have either your crack book either. I'm sorry.
Uh, well, I mean, let's back up a little bit here. The first set of Mad parodies were for the comic book, and that's when you
Yeah.
got your Whack and Wild and Madhouse and Bughouse and number of other titles. Yeah, not well. Those are for the magazine, so you need to get the book, The Sincerest Form of Parody, because that's the comic book
It's
parodies.
also an ILL book that's coming to me. I've got like
Yeah,
18 more
yeah.
out.
So that's the comic book parody era, and
Yeah.
most of those lasted about 7 issues or less. Um, and which 7 issues back then was like a year.
Yeah.
So there's a version of Crazy that wasn't it was made by Marvel, but it was Atlas, I guess, but it wasn't
Yeah,
the
there's
later
there's
Crazy.
there's like a different versions of Crazy. There was like this magazine's Crazy or
Well,
Crazy
that was a
Mad Crazy.
Charlton one. So Charlton got the
Yeah.
rights to the title for a while. But so then when Mad became a magazine, then you had the second go round, which is what You're Behaving Madly has. And you know, why did Cracked succeed when others failed? Um, it's hard to tell. I
Well,
mean,
you could argue that Crack didn't succeed either, but let's just say it did.
John Severin is a big reason why Crack succeeded. Although Severin was in Loco, so I don't know why that one didn't succeed, and that wasn't related to Cracked.
Yeah.
But I think it was because these publishers realized, it takes a lot of work to do these publications. So probably a lot of it had to do with that. A lot of it had to do with not everybody's buying all of them. I mean, people have. If you read the Amazon reviews about Behaving Madly, um, they give good high praise to the book, but they realize that a lot of the stuff that they reprinted from those old magazines isn't very funny. It's like it just
The the,
the
the
terrible writing.
magazine the magazine I liked. I wish it succeeded more because I thought Whack is that 3 issue thing that St. John did.
Yeah,
I thought Whack was good because everything it was more I thought it was more like not Brand X than it
yeah,
was like Mad in a way because this was right on the cusp when St. John now was at the top of the world because of their Mighty Mouse comic book,
right.
right? And then bam, everything they parodied was based on St. John, or it was some kind of celebrity parody, which St. John was doing because that issue with like Bing Crosby as like some weird superhero. I thought that was they're different that I liked. I liked them.
Yeah. I think St. John probably would have continued, but their issue was um mainly due to just overextending themselves like comic book companies do. And, they
Yeah.
went out, Archer St. John just kind of went out of business. So that was the end of that.
Yeah.
So, and it happened. A lot of it had to do with the whole comics code thing and everything else. A lot of it just had to do with their own bad business choices. Um, like
Somebody should write a good St. John book, I think.
there's a small one, a smallish one that's pretty good, called Love Stories and something or other. I'll have to tell you about it, but that one's probably the best one. It's a small paperback, but it tells a story decently. Um, what else? Trying to think of other comic companies. It's like
Marvel did like 18 different, tried like multiple times to do a Mad parody.
which one? Marvel?
And
Yeah,
Marvel,
yeah.
which not Brand X was on this list that I found, but is it really a Mad parody? Not really, kinda.
At the later issues, because if you've read all 13 issues, the first 8 issues are pretty much standard uh parodies of Marvel stories. So it has
And their
Thing
competitor.
battling the Hulk, or the origin of Charlie America, the origin of the Fantastical Four, and those type of things. Yeah, so that was like the first 8 issues. Issue 9, they became a giant, and suddenly they had to fill in with new material, and so they started putting wackier stuff. They did, there's one called, and I think it's in issue 9, is called Arch and the Teenstalk, and it has Archie. It's an Archie parody, and then the three ghoul lunatics from EC Comics make an appearance and things like that. So they were stretching the boundaries of what they're parodying from just Marvel characters to other stuff. But Not Brainiac is really Marvel hero focused for the most part. But
And
those last
they parody
issues,
their competitor too, though.
yeah, and those last issues had potential of something greater.
Yeah.
Basically, you know, going back to the 50s stuff. So their stuff was, they did a version of Crazy and they did Wild that was like the comic book Mad. They're okay. They're not the greatest. The art's good, the humor's decent. But they're a copycat magazine, so they're doomed to fail. Then Mad became a black and white magazine. Stan Lee decided to do Snafu, which was their version, and lasted 3 issues. And it's decent, but it got lost in the shuffle like everything else. The only thing you could say is Stan Lee got out faster than Cracked and everybody else. He was like one of the first imitators that came out. Um, and then they just kind of stopped for a while till Not Brandak, and Not Brandak, its excuse I think was just to do parodies of their own comics. And then after that, they did this comic called Spoof that was kind of heading back in the mad direction. Only lasted 5 issues, and then they did a comic book Crazy. There was a reprint title of Not Brandak, and then they finally went full blown with another humor magazine, the black and white one, and that was Crazy again.
I know
And
they did like the series ARG, which basically just
yeah,
just just reused the St. John stuff and a lot of that
yeah,
stuff.
Arg was kind of more of a hybrid because DC was doing Plop, which was kind of mad related too, and even had Sergio in it. So Arg was like their version of trying to do like a horror comic book, and it didn't quite succeed. It only lasted like 5 issues too. I liked it, but yeah. Um, when Crazy came around as a magazine, Stan Lee wanted to do just a mad ripoff, and editor Marv Wolfman wanted to do a Lampoon, National Lampoon type magazine. So they kind of compromised. So those early issues of Crazy actually are a lot edgier than Mad was doing. They're darker in a certain way and stuff like that. Not really necessarily sexier unless you consider the Crazy look at streaking, where they have photos but they don't show anything. Everybody's kind of blocked off. But
Yeah.
it's but
Yeah, a
uh
lot of that, a lot some Mad parodies were just basically photos like with captions on them.
mm, well, even Kurtzman's Help was a lot of that.
Yeah,
you know
that's what I was gonna also say.
yeah.
Like Help was very.
And I always think Kurtzman did that. This is the one disappointing thing about Kurtzman is when he was in a pinch for filling pages, he would do something like that. And he even did this one. I always consider the original Mad. You're asking me the best and everything. I always consider the original Mad issue 13 to be the worst. And I don't think the cover's particularly funny. It's an all orange cover and has the cartoon and the Mad logo really small up in the corner, and it's kind of a non-joke joke about the size of titles and images and stuff. It's like, okay, maybe it made more sense in 1953. I don't know, but then the issue has like this story called Baby Quips, which is full page black and white photos with captions, and
Mhm.
it's like, granted, a few issues earlier, Kurtzman was in the hospital with jaundice, and so he had to play catch up. They even reprinted Hey Look pages and Hotshot Pete and stuff like that. So I get it. He was that
They
he,
reprinted Hey Look pages in Mad.
yes, they did,
Is
and
that legal?
they got permission. You know,
Oh,
is that legal?
I thought Marvel owned the Hey Look series.
They did, but they do, but they got permission. There's Hey Look pages in Crazy, but then of course Marvel owns that. So, but yeah, anytime that it's been reprinted, those Hey Look pages, like Cochran had to get permission from Marvel. Everybody had to get permission from Marvel to reprint those pages. So they don't tend to reprint them unless they're doing a complete reprinting. So anyway, um, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so he did this thing called Baby Quips, and it's just photos and captions and kind of a filler thing. It's actually kind of funny, but you know, that's what Kurtzman tended to do when he was at a loss for material.
So, like, my next question for you is though is that is now you were saying you were also discussing how Cracked came to be.
Yeah.
Because when I talk about the Mad parodies and how they compare, I am going to have to say how Cracked was formed.
Well, Cracked was formed from the basically Atlas or Marvel um, had a implosion in like 1957 or something like that, and all the artists and writers had nowhere to go. Um, Major magazines existed as Ace Publishing was a science fiction publisher. They published different magazines and paperbacks and things. And Bill Sproul, the publisher, was interested. Um, the no, it's Bob. Bill's his son, Bob Sproul, um, was interested in doing a humor magazine, and all these guys from Atlas were kind of out of work, and so he hired them. He snapped them all up. So the editor was Saul Brodsky. He got Jim Maneely, he got Severin, he got I can't remember all the people in those earliest. Russ Heath. Um, just all the artists and writers that were working at Mad. I mean, not Mad, I mean at Atlas, and started a magazine. Now, does that mean it would have lasted 45 years? That was just kind of pure dumb luck, I think. Anyway,
Did now a lot of these magazines also had Mad artists doing it. I know Mort Drucker did stuff for Cracked, I think,
no, he did not.
or I'm
Uh,
thinking of Sergio did stuff for Cracked,
no, he didn't
or
either.
no, who did
um,
stuff for Cracked then at Mad at
a lot of people, but not those two. Angelo Torres did a few things. Jaffe did. Davis did quite a bit. Elder did a bit. Let's see. Trying to think who else. I mean, even like later people like Tom Richmond, they got their start at Cracked. Even John Ficarra, the
mhm.
editor of Mad, got his start at Cracked. So, um,
Now what did Feldstein think about like Cracked and Crazy?
they didn't, according to the research I found, they didn't think much of them either way, too much, because none of them were a serious sales threat. I mean, the first humor publication that made any sort of inroads on sales was National Lampoon. Um,
Hmm. Because it's pretty safe to assume, I imagine, that the people who were buying Cracked were already buying Mad.
yeah, I mean, to quote Dan Close, who has a quote on the back of my crack book, it's like you bought Mad. I mean, you bought Cracked when you couldn't find Mad in the stands. because neither were published monthly. Mad was 8 times a year back then, and this is the 60s and 70s, and Cracked was between 6 and 7 times a year, sometimes 8 and 9. But neither of them were monthly, so there would be gaps where
Hmm.
there just wasn't a new issue out. So and then what Close said is like you'd buy Cracked, and then you'd take it home and read it, and you'd remember why you hated Cracked, and I'll never buy this again. But then you'd get a month or two later, there'd be no more Mad, and you'd want another humor magazine. There's Cracked. So, you know, I don't think Cracked was that bad, but it was
No,
pale imitator, and it had its moments where it's actually better than Mad, which I think the late '80s was definitely a period where Cracked was better than Mad. So, I
now
think.
what about we talked about the origins of crazy. We did talk about that, but what about sick? How did that come about?
Um,
Because sick was like, as I told you, that there's a fan mail thing that in sick that basically says you're just copying what cracked and what mad and even cracked did much better.
you know, well, I haven't researched it 100%, but I have Joe Simon's book, so that's really what I have to go on. And from what I remember on Simon's book is that his teaming with Jack Kirby kind of ended, and so he was looking for other things to do. Because it was around that same time that Kirby went to work with Stan Lee. So um, and I suppose Simon and Lee could have done something together, but it always struck me as Joe Simon and Stan Lee were cordial to each other, but not like buddy buddies where they could team up on anything. So there you go. Um, and my belief is that, it was the same thing, by this is 1960, so Cracked has been around for a couple years. Mad has definitely been around for 7 or 8 years at that point. So uh there's room for another humor magazine, and I think Joe Simon felt that he could probably make it last because of his connections with artists and writers from the past, because he'd already been in the industry 20 years by the time he started Sick. So and he could get pretty much anybody to work for his publication, and he got Sick is actually a pretty decent publication for like the first 60 or so issues, which is like the first decade of it. um and then
Hold
slowly.
up, Mark.
What?
What my next question was, well, when is your sick book coming out?
When Joe Simon says I can do it. That's as blunt as I can get. um the issue with Sick, I am working on a crazy book. I guess I did say that, and
Yeah, you
but,
did.
but the issue with Sick is that you have to work with the Simon estate, and they want their cut, and it's difficult. I will say this, that before the pandemic, I was working with a couple different people that were working with the Simon estate. I don't know if I should say it here. I could say it offline. But we were pretty darn close to getting an agreement, and then the pandemic happened, and so it's kind of in limbo out there. But nobody else is going to be able to do a Sick book either, because you have to go through the Simon estate. This is
Kind of like your Warren Kremer book.
yeah, yeah, kind of like that. You have to go through well, Kremer estate to get that one done, and so that one's just in limbo. That book is, well, even the Sick book is done. It's just sitting there.
Two books that'll never see the light of day.
Who knows? We'll see.
Now, now, sorry to bring up Bad Homestead here. Now, what do you think is the difference between the fan mail of Mad versus all of these other magazines?
Well, the fan mail,
We've discussed this a little bit, but
yeah.
I need a thorough answer.
Well, the fan mail in Mad was written by real people. You could tell. There's also a
Yeah,
lot of celebrities reading Mad. Working on the Cracked book and the Crazy book in more recent time. I'm trying to see if anybody famous ever wrote a letter to them that actually was published, and
yeah.
very, very, very few examples. And I don't know if that means nobody did or they just didn't warrant their publication. I mean, Crazy has a letter early on from Harlan Ellison, which, oh, what a coup. And then you realize, well, he wrote an article in issue one. So it's not like, he was, you know, so he was aware of Crazy by being paid by them. So they might have paid him even to write a letter. So, um, and in the later issue of Crazy, I mean, I got a letter published, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm nobody. It's like in comparison to, um, I don't know if you know this person. I pointed out because it's just funny. This person has a very unique name, and he's written a book and a few other things. His name is Lawrence Laney Lofton, and I pointed out, hey, you got two letters in Crazy, and he goes, how about that? He'd kind of forgotten that he did, but he's like, that's the extent of fame that I've found so far. You know, it may switch by the end of the run, but it may not because Crazy was an oddball title anyway. So.
Did anybody famous get cracked? I'm just curious. This is not an actual question I need to ask.
That wrote letters. Well, yeah, that was during that 1980s period. Like even Pee Wee Herman I mean, cracked onto the Joan Rivers show. There's even photos of it in the book. Early on, though, Steve Allen got cracked on Steve Allen's show, and he even appeared on the cover.
Yeah,
So
but Steve Allen wrote for Mad too.
yeah, so he was aware of cracked. Um, Simpsons used to make fun of cracked,
Yeah,
yeah,
the Simpsons wrote to Mad.
yeah.
The whole Simpsons crew had written to Mad too.
Yeah. So, I don't know if that answers your question more, but that's basically it. Uh, that a lot of celebrities did write to Mad, and they wrote
I
thorough letters
yeah,
usually.
I must point out, so for a magazine that was like criticized for being crude, like Mad was,
Hmm.
Steve Allen seemed to like it, despite the fact that he was the face of anti. Years later, he'd be the face of anti-crude humor for all public television.
Mm, yeah. Well, I mean, things change, people change. I don't know. Because I always liked Steve Allen, but his early stuff, it's kind of like David Letterman. His early stuff is the better stuff. And as he's gotten
Yeah,
older, he's kind of, and a lot of comedians do this, a lot of funny people do this. As they get older, they're not as funny. They get a little more content. I mean, even this morning I was watching Sunday Morning, and they did a profile on Steve Martin, and although I think Steve Martin's still funny, he's not funny in the same way he was when he was really young. He's
hmm
more content and kind of satisfied saying, yeah, I've done some movies, and it was fun doing stand up, and I'm working with Martin Short on the TV and blah blah. Whereas in the
It's not
old
like
days,
Groucho.
oh, I'm a wild and crazy guy. He doesn't do that anymore. It's like, well, it's like things change.
It's unlike somebody like Groucho who was still funny when he died.
Yeah, there. I mean, there's exceptions. He's an exception. I think Tommy Smothers was funny all the way through. It's like unfortunately he passed away recently, so. But I always liked anything the Smothers Brothers did, no matter when it was. I didn't think they ever lost it. So
Hmm
there you go. I don't think Bob Newhart ever lost it. I think now, he's just kind of out of the public eye because he's so old. But it's like
Bob
uh,
Newhart's, yeah,
anytime he appeared on any show, he always made the show better, even if he couldn't
yeah,
stand like Big Bang Theory, which I like. But
yeah,
some people couldn't stand it. Bob Newhart was still a bright spot on it. So
yeah. I always think that I always getting off track. Bob, his show Bob. I always puzzled him like, do I like the show Bob because it's Bob Newhart, or do I like the show Bob because he's a comic book artist? That always threw me off, and I'm like, why do I like this show again? Which one is it?
yeah, I think for me it's Bob Newhart because the fact that he's a comic book artist and the show is disappointing um, didn't sit well with me. I mean, I saw it when it was originally on, and it just was cringeworthy. It's like, oh, even Sergio's on there, and Bob Kane, and everything else, and I'm like, oh, it could be funnier, And so I had troubles with it, you know.
Yeah,
So the original one where he's a psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever, is the best, and the
yeah, I
one where
agree.
he's running the inn isn't bad. So
No, I like the one where he ran it again. It took me a couple of episodes of watching it, and I'm like, all right, yeah, this is funny because
Yeah.
like, why isn't I'm like that's what I kept thinking. Why isn't he Bob Hartley? That's what I kept thinking, and then it
Oh,
ends up being he is Bob Hartley, but
yeah, yeah. Well, don't spoil the ending. Anyway,
it's
50
like
years
it's not
later.
like anybody doesn't know.
I know. Rosebud is a sled.
Skywalker is Darth Vader's son.
Oh, no, no, no.
Yeah, and now the other question about Cracked that I just have to have a curious question: is Cracked the same thing as the website?
Indirectly. I mean, originally it was in tandem, and then yeah, because the magazine was still being published when they started the website. Mad had a website too. Well, it's still around, but and then as Cracked, when Cracked stopped publishing the monthly, then it evolved into the kind of the Cracked where it's little newsy items the way it is now. And
It's
at
like
that,
it's like a BuzzFeed kind of thing now.
yeah, and they tried to bring back Cracked as kind of a, well, now this is a dated reference, as a Maxim type magazine, which was kind of like arts
What
and
the hell is that?
entertainment. Well, Maxim, it was big in like the, oh, in the aughts. uh, they'd get like celebrity women to get scantily clad in their underwear. It was like a Playboy where you kept your clothes on, and
Uh,
they had like just name any of the stars of the day. Uh, Cindy Crawford or I'm trying to name ones that are still around. You know, Claudia Schiffer was a big model back then. The one who married Joan Hart, who was Sabrina the Teenage Witch. They all got them to Amanda Bynes. They got them all to kind of take off their clothes to a certain extent. You never saw any skin. You just, they'd put a towel up or something. Yeah. But so it was like a PG-13 version of Playboy, and it was pretty successful for about a decade. But I think it went the way of everything else because people just don't buy magazines as much anymore. So there you go.
yeah, that was my next question: is how is Mad been able to? Because Mad seems to frequently now just like every 2 years seems to just be extinct and everyone gets upset and then just comes back randomly.
Well, Mad never completely went away. It's just that this last time was like the biggie. Mad moved from New York to California in 2018. They got Bill Morrison as the editor, and they didn't give him a chance. Basically, I mean, he was only the editor for like the first 6 issues. He had enough material to go to like issue 9 or 10 or something like that, and yeah, but they basically fired him, and that was the end of that. Um, I think it had potential to becoming a funny thing, and supposedly sales were back up, not to like the heyday in the '70s with millions of issues being sold, but certainly higher than they were at the end of the New York days. Um, but at the time, AT&T, the phone company, was a player in this whole Warner Brothers thing, which is now Warner Brothers Discovery, and they just thought Mad was a money loser, and so they just cut the staff and said, "Nope, no more new issues. We're done. Just reprints." And so they run it on a skeleton crew. They got Susie Hutchison doing the um, editing, and they got this other guy. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. That does like the art direction, and they got Johnny Sampson doing new fold-ins, and then Sergio contributes new marginals, and that's pretty much your new issue of Mad. And then they, hire any artist that they can find from the past 20 years to do a cover. And, the latest cover is a Taylor Swift cover, which happened to be very timely, but there's nothing inside about Taylor Swift or anything. So if anybody's buying it, they're just buying it for the cover. Um,
So there's a lot of issues of Mad where it's like that. It has nothing to do with what's inside the
true,
book.
true, but it's worse now. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, showing my bald head here. I had to turn off my fan there for a second. It's worse now because uh, it it's frustrating when like there'll be a new movie in a series, like a Godzilla movie, let's say, and when the new issue Mad comes out, they have Godzilla on the cover, and you go, "Oh boy!" And hopefully they'll do a parody of that new Godzilla movie. No, it'll be a reprint from the 90s of some older Godzilla movie. And if they do Mad About Star Wars, which is a legitimate book that's out on the stands right now, they won't reprint every Star Wars parody because the very last one wasn't done for Mad. It was Tom Richmond and Desmond Devlin did it for their Kickstarter project called Claptrap. So there you go. Anyway.
Yeah, how did that turn out?
Well, I loved it. It's great. You can order it now. It's just a regular
Hmm.
thing you can order on Amazon. It's like $20, so it's not bad. But
No, I'm talking about
oh,
the Tom Richmond's project.
yeah, that's what I was talking about. The Claptrap. Yeah, it's no longer a Kickstarter. I did it as the Kickstarter, so I got a copy once it was done. But now you can just order it on
It,
Amazon.
now now I do have to ask you a couple questions. So of people's most famous Mad series or things, like the
Mm.
most frequent are the fold-ins,
Mm.
Al Jaffee's fold-ins and snappy answers to stupid questions, and the Marginals by Sergio. And now
Spy versus Spy.
Spy versus Spy was on the other thing on my list, but Spy versus Spy didn't that come much later than the other stuff?
It started before Sergio started there, so it started in like 1960, and Sergio didn't start till 63, so 62, 63, something like that. So,
One of the questions I got to ask though is how would you describe the art? Now let's just we can't really say now anymore because art in 1952 versus the art in 2018 of Matt.
yeah.
How would you describe their how they're different?
Well, 52 to 55 was a comic book, so that kind of followed comic book rules. So you really can't compare there too much to the magazine. But if you compare the magazine from 55 on to 2018, I mean,
Yeah.
the obvious switch is it was in color. But the big switch that is noticeable is if you read stuff from the 50s in Mad, and then by the 70s, comparing it to it, it's the same artists and writers, but their artwork is far less dense. They don't use so much zipatone. They don't use so much inking and everything. Everything is more like general line work. And I don't know if they did that just to streamline their own process or there's just the nature of the beast. Um, like so in those early magazine issues after Kurtzman, Don Martin was the standout artist because he was the only one doing like line work, just outlines and stuff like that. Whereas, yeah, you look at Dave Berg's stuff, it's not anything like his later lighter side things. Is like he has shading and everything is like three-dimensional. It's very graphic and dark and not dark in a bad way, dark and just dense.
Yeah.
And that's the big shift I noticed on Mad, from the 50s to the more present time is, you get more and more cartoony style and less real serious illustrator style over the years. And it's almost like Mad now is like a comic book, the last issues. And that's no fault of Morrison. It's just the nature of how art has changed over the years. You know,
And why do you think Mad let's be honest with you, Mad is not an influential magazine anymore.
no.
Why do you think Mad what I wouldn't say what killed Mad is not that's not the right way to ask the question. But you get what I'm trying to ask.
Um, why did it fall apart after being at such a high peak? I guess. Well, I mean, I'll say this, and then I'll say my own opinion. If you listen to Feldstein, he thought that the reason why Mad kind of started falling is because it was its own thing. He felt that it needed a TV show, it needed movies, it needed all the
We're
other
gonna get to that in my
stuff.
next question. We're
Yeah,
gonna get to
you
all that
needed,
in my next
okay,
question.
felt it needed all that stuff. Well, the ironic thing is later on it did get all that stuff, but the magazine still failed. So, uh, but they did have differing levels of success, which we can talk about. But, um, Matt's failure over the years since the mid 70s basically boils down to just people don't read magazines anymore. And if you're going to stop a magazine, unfortunately, the sillier and humor magazines tend to go first over information. So you still see Time magazine, let's say, you know, doing new material because people always like their news. You'll still have a National Geographic because it's still information. But when it comes to, just being generally silly, oh, I have no time for such frivolous stuff, so I will cut this, and it's always the first to go. How Mad lasted as long as it did is just because it was so good when it was good and popular. So
Cracked. When did that fold, by the way? When did Cracked end?
Um, the original version 2004, the Maxim version is 2007.
All
There's
right.
only like three issues, so I don't
I'm
know.
still confused. What does maximum mean?
It
It's
was
you
it
lost
was
me. You
it
lost
was
me.
okay, just like Playboy, right? Okay.
Of course.
Playboy is known for articles,
The way I said that was funny.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they don't even make Playboy anymore, but it's like they have nudes in Playboy, and but in Maxim they just had clothes on. That's the only difference. But they had
What
articles and
does that
stuff
have to
that
do with crack?
it,
That's
it
my
was
question.
well, that's what they were trying to imitate. They were trying to make the new crack. They didn't want to make the new crack that lasted only three issues like the old crack. The old crack was like Mad. The new crack, they didn't want to do it like Mad. They wanted to do it like what was popular at the time, which was the Maxim type magazine. There was another one called FHM that was popular at the time for him, I guess, is what, it's magazines that you could show in front of your mother because there's no nudity in it.
Yeah.
It's just a tamer
I
version of Playboy. That's all I'm saying.
but
It's nothing to really dwell on other than that. You know.
I have a really good Mad story, by the way.
Hmm.
You know that Mad for Decades book?
Yeah,
The big thick book that's the printing is too small and they kind of ruined it by that book.
yeah.
They ruined it by making the print so small you can't even read it.
Hmm.
Well, I was attempting to read it while I was during lunch in my high
Magnifying
school,
glass. Yeah.
during lunch in my high school, and the printing's so poor you couldn't use a magnifying glass, so you tried.
Oh, yeah.
But and the brother and I went to a Catholic school, remember? So the brother was thinking it hurt. The guy took it away from me and he gave it to the disciplinarian, and the disciplinarian sent me in the office, and it's like apparently the brother is calling this a sinful thing, but I got better things. The disciplinarian literally says, I got better things to worry about, dude. Just take your book. These kids are playing games on their computer. They're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're the least of my worries. Just take
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
The age was showing.
Yeah.
Brother just looked at me and just said, this simple things. And he just took it from me. And I'm like,
Oh well, I have no answer for that. Other anyway,
yeah, yeah. All the staff was like, why did you take this away from him?
yeah, yeah.
But
Oh,
now we're gonna now talk about Mad's other things. Like the first thing I learned about what Mad did is I learned that there was a cartoon, which I watched a few episodes earlier. It's
mhm.
really bad.
Yeah. Although ironically, it's the closest to real Mad. Well, maybe the 1974 special that never aired is closest, but yeah. There's
Then there's the
also
Broadway show.
there's also a 90s Hanna-Barbera version that's even harder to find.
Wait, what?
You probably don't even know about that.
I
Yeah.
don't know what exists.
Yeah, it came out in the 90s. Oh, it didn't come out in the 90s. It's highly shelved, but I think a few scenes have made it onto YouTube. So anyway, that's
I and then there's Mad TV, which I'm really confused of what Mad TV has to do with Mad Magazine.
nothing.
I really don't know. Like does
Well,
it is it's like crack.com. Like what does Mad TV have to do with Mad Magazine? Seriously, what
I
does it have
mean,
to do?
initially when Mad TV came on, they did a single issue special that promoted it. So there was a tie-in that way. And then the early episodes had Spy versus Spy animation and Don Martin animation, so there was a slight connection that way. But eventually, that stuff went by the wayside, and it just became another version of Saturday Night Live. Although I think it
Yeah,
was
that's what I thought.
funnier. I think it was funnier than Saturday Night Live in those years. It was still basically became a riff off of Saturday Night Live versus Mad. They didn't even promote Mad. They could have called it silly TV or whatever. They didn't have to use the Mad
Why?
title because there's no
Why?
connection anymore. You know, so
I had no idea Mad TV had anything to do with Mad Magazine until like 2 weeks ago. I seriously had no idea. I thought
yeah,
that was
well,
just
they
some.
they do show Alfred's head on it, but so what? And they do give copyright notice to EC, but so what? It's like, except for, like I said, one standalone issue special, there's no magazine connection. And then they did the cartoons on the first season or two, but the show lasted 14 seasons. So it's like the later years certainly doesn't have anything to do with Mad. So it is
So,
what it is.
what's the point of calling it Mad TV?
Well, it's like anything else when they do all these reboots nowadays. They always have to tie in something. They've done this with other things in recent times. They'll make a movie and call it something. And I can't think of a good example of a current one, but
I know what you're referring
yeah,
to.
it's like they'll call it something, and it's like not even remotely related to the other thing other than the name. So
And then there was the Broadway show, and I got to ask you about this. And here's why I know the Broadway show.
mhm.
Alexa, shut up. Sorry, my Alexa's telling me to do something. Now the Broadway show, I learned this because I think I probably told you about my career working at the UAB archives in their LGBT collection. Well,
Mhm,
after that, they put me with the playwright stuff, and I kept
mhm.
saying this ad for Mad's Broadway show.
Yeah.
What the hell is Mad's Broadway show? All right,
Well, it never actually, I
I
don't
know
think
the
it,
answer to this a little bit.
oh, okay, but it never actually appeared
I
on
know a little
Broadway.
bit
I think
about
it
this.
actually appeared off Broadway, but still close enough. It's just called The Mad Show.
Yeah, it was
Um,
the a lot of playbills had off Broadway stuff. So
yeah, they got a couple of the regular Mad writers to write the thing. Um, it was kind of a cabaret thing, where it's just like songs and it was like if you did Laugh-In, you've seen Rono Martin's Laugh-In. It was kind of if you
hmm
did that on stage, but had a little more singing. And it even had
so
Joanne Worley on it, which is, so
so so the Mad Broadway show didn't have anything less to do with Mad than like the Mad TV did, really.
it had more to do with Mad than probably the Mad TV did, but it's still kind of its own standalone thing. There was a soundtrack album, and they didn't really promote it in the magazine very well, so it's like you kind of just had to kind of know about it. It was kind of a thing to feed their own egos, I think.
How how do you even adapt Mad exactly? How does one exactly adapt Mad without it just being not Mad? Because it doesn't seem possible unless like, I don't know if you saw this, there's like a fan animated project on Super Duper Man, which adapts it a lot pretty directly,
Well,
which that's
it
fairly good.
depends on what your definition of mad is. If mad is like we were talking about the regular features like Golden Spy versus Spy and Don Martin and whatever, then that's mad. If your definition of mad is just general parody, well then, the Mad Cartoon Show and the Mad TV work because, and even Mad Show to a certain extent, because that's generally what they're doing. They're parodying something. Basically the Mad Show is a parody of a Broadway show at that time. It's on such a subtle level, it's not terribly funny. And Mad is accused of doing that a lot. I mean, their very first comedy album was a parody of classical music. Well, how many kids are listening to classical music? So it's kind of an
There's a
obscure parody, you know.
Yeah, there's an issue of Mad later that parodies Laurel and Hardy, and I'm like, all right, this is like 2002. I'm like, what does this do?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it didn't bother me, but it's like I could see other people being really confused. But, that's part of probably the reason why Mad isn't as successful as it used to be because, we're too, um, what's the word?
Yep.
Just not hip. Well, that might be too, but too dissipated as a culture, you know, like, there's so many different things you can do. You don't have to
hmm
sit and read a magazine and then watch three channels on your TV of network stuff, that everybody watches. It's like, If you want to play with video games on your smartphone, you can do that. If you want to watch TikTok videos, you can do that. If you want to go for a walk and not have any interference of social media, you can do that. It's like not everybody's sitting at home, you know, focused on the same few things. And as a society, apparently we were for a long period of time. And my feeling about that is has to do with war and military and stuff like that. Because the way up until later wars, if we were at war, we are all kind of uniform, thinking the same thing. We're going to go out and get that bad guy Hitler, or we're going to go out and get the
Uh,
Kaiser. What I'm
what
saying,
happened in Vietnam, Mark?
that's later. That's not that you missed my thing. I said not later stuff. I said up until that point. So we had this kind of basic uniformity in life up until that point, and MAD originally came on the tail end of that. Even the Korean War, even though it was, I think, as an unjust war as the Vietnam War, had enough people saying, we're going to win. We got to get rid of communism and everything like that. And MAD was at the start of all that. So we had this kind of uniform way of thinking. There was basically a right way to think and a wrong way to think. And over the years, thanks to MAD, strangely enough, things have kind of dissipated out to where, oh, you can think other ways. You don't have to think this way. You can still love your country, but you don't have to go to war over it. You can, and then it got to the point where, well, if you want to be one of the people who live here and don't love their country, you can be that too. We're all accepting everything now. You can have different preferences on things. You can have different thoughts about things. You can wear your hair different colors. You can do anything with your skin or your clothing or whatever. And since it's all dissipated like that, there's no like uniform thing where anybody can grab onto any. It's very difficult to. So yeah, you mentioned the Laurel and Hardy thing. It's like, yeah, it's like that's kind of grasping at straws for something from the past. Well, why aren't they doing like Key and Peele or something? It's like make it a little more
Yeah.
modern. But it's like there isn't the same connection there. you know
One of one of the common comments about MAD that never made any sense to me that people criticized it during 2018 was that it's making fun of politics. And I'm like, well, MAD made fun of politics before.
Yeah, that's just bullshit. I mean, man made fun of politics from the beginning. Uh,
Yeah.
the
Like,
earliest example is "What's My Shine," which is in issue 17, and it's like it was a parody of McCarthyism, uh,
yeah.
and it totally fits for what's happening now. You just change a few names and
Do you
change a few situations, but it's the same thing. You know,
do you think MAD would have even happened if it hadn't been for because the McCarthy hearings were big and
yeah.
a lot of stuff came out of the McCarthy hearings that
Hmm.
would not have probably happened if McCarthy hadn't had such an influence on the media politics. Like, Jay Ward pretty much came out of McCarthyism.
Hmm.
Jay Ward Studio pretty much came out of McCarthyism. Bill Scott was blacklisted. Jay Ward
Yeah.
was the conservative right, but he, you know, the,
Well, Matt existed first. I
right.
mean,
No,
uh,
but McCarthyism had been a thing before.
I guess they were doing red listing and stuff like, but things like Matt even ignored it. They weren't doing commentary on Hollywood and stuff until the Red Scare started going into comic books, and then it's like EC did that "Are You a Red Dupe?" and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And that I put in my Mad book, even though it's not a Mad thing. It looks like a Mad thing, but it didn't even appear in Mad. Uh, so that was like the beginning of it, but Mad already existed by that point. You know, it,
Do you
it
think do you think that's part of mainly due to Wortham though too?
well, when they're when they're coming after movie actors and saying they're communists or whatever, Mad basically, whether they intended to do it or not, just turned a blind eye to it. They weren't paying attention to it. Once they came after the comic books, Then
Yeah.
suddenly, oh, they're in the backyard here, so we better start paying
What
attention.
what
You
I
know,
one time what I don't understand is why people separate Wortham stuff from McCarthyism stuff. What I always think, if McCarthyism hadn't happened, there would have been no seduction of the innocent.
probably not. Yeah, because we've had it forever though. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like anytime there's a new form of entertainment, it's happening now. You know why it's the way it's happening now? Oh, we got to ban TikTok because the Chinese can get all our information. That's what's happening now. But
yeah.
you go back 30 years. Oh, we got to ban the rock and roll lyrics because everybody will hear
That's
bad
what my
lyrics
opinion
and
of
try to
music
kill
is.
kill themselves. So you go back further. It's like, oh, we got to ban video games because video games rot your brain and blah blah blah. It's like I'm sure the
If we
first thing invented. We got to ban books. Gutenberg.
That's my thing about like Taylor Swift. These people who are like anti Taylor Swift, I'm like, you people are criticizing Taylor Swift for the exact same reason your parents criticized you for listening to rap.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and then and for your for your parents' for listening to the Beatles, you are all every generation's music has the older generation just scoff at it like there's like it's
Yeah.
the sin of the world. Because people
Yeah.
did the exact same thing with swing music.
Yeah. It's all cyclical. If you study your history, which I know you do, you find similar patterns to the point where it's actually maddening. You say, wow, we've been through this before. Didn't we learn anything from it? It's like,
Yeah.
but apparently not. And so we have to go through it again. It's like, they always say those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. Well, those who do know history are doomed to repeat it too, just because the other people that don't know are repeating it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my
Anyways,
soapbox.
I think that is pretty much it.
Thank God. Oh, so
Actually, I got one more question for
all
you,
right.
and that's the one question that I keep hearing. By the way, is Alfred E. Newman, there seems to be multiple stories about how Alfred E. Newman was created.
Yeah.
I always figured that Alfred E. Newman, in many ways, and his parody in many ways, is just another version of like the Yellow Kid.
Yeah. Could be. I
If you
mean,
could equate,
if you want to go back to the beginning of time on humor and everything like that, I mean, originally there was the village idiot,
right?
and it was the person. I mean, he might have been mentally disturbed, but he was the person that everybody laughed at. And whether they had a missing tooth or not is moot. But it could have been a similarity with this with all of them. As time went on, you wanted to get paid for your work, so then you get court jesters coming into the picture and things like that. So you always had like a foil of humor somewhere along the line. Um, as far as the printed version with what eventually became Alfred, because he wasn't Alfred, he was just a kid. And the worst to say is me worry or what me worry. So he's a what me worry kid originally. Um, they don't know the original version of it, but when they were having the lawsuits about it in the '60s, when Mad tried to appropriate the character as their trademark, um, they kept people kept saying, "Oh, I own the copyright this on this," and then people would find an earlier version. So the earliest version found was like a painless dentist ad, in Topeka, Kansas, is supposedly the story. And I've seen it before, and they're pointing to the missing tooth, saying it didn't hurt a bit because they pulled the tooth out.
Well, that's extreme to say that one of the people of Mad saw that and like, oh, I'm gonna make.
No, but they didn't see that originally. That's not how they made Alfred. That's when they were
No,
trying
I
to
know
secure
because
the
that'd be like
copyright.
extreme. Like,
You know, how they saw it originally is the original publisher of Mad Paperbacks, Ballantine. Apparently, Ian Ballantine, the publisher, had kind of odd interests and ideas and stuff like that. And the me worry face appeared on things like postcards that you could pull out of machines and stuff like that. And he had this face pinned to the wall in his office. And Kurtzman saw it when he was talking about making the very first Mad paperback, the Mad Reader, and thought it would be funny to put that character on the front of Mad. He wasn't trying to think of Alfred E. Newman. He wasn't trying to think of a mascot. He just thought it was a funny picture. Throw it on the cover of the book, and they didn't think about copyrights on it or if it was owned by anybody or anything, so they just threw it on the book and there it was. And then it was Feldstein who decided to make it into something after Kurtzman left, and he gave him a name, which originally was Melvin Kovnowski or something like that. And then Alfred E. Newman's a little bit easier to say and write. And then he got Mingo precisely just to paint a definitive version that looked like a human being, because all previous versions looked kind of cartoony and stupid. And that was the version they got trademarked. So, there you are.
Alrighty. I think this is it for this podcast. Mark, I got one other question after we're done with recording.
All right. Okay, we will wrap it up. Thank you for interviewing me. I'll give another plug for my own book, Unconditionally Mad Part 1 and Part B. They're available now, Amazon, Barnes Noble, and Bear Manor Media. Okay, and we will see you next time with another Fun Ideas podcast.